That's all good. Okay. So anyone who hasn't met me yet, I will. Hi. I help organize this Elementor Australia meetup. I work by day as a freelance WordPress developer. Today's session comes directly out of what I see breaking on real client sites. So it's very practical. It's not theoretical. It's not techie. Just patterns and discussions that hold up in real builds. Just quickly, we do have our code of conduct. It's on the Elementor website. I'll copy it and put it into the chat. Just be respectful, be decent humans. That's all it really means. And this is more for larger meetups, but drop your name, location, what you're drinking, what you're up to in the chat if you like it. Totally, utterly optional. Next month, I am talking about building client-proof pages in Elementor. So that the concept behind that is when you're handing it over, they don't break it within 2 days and you get a support call to say, why is this thing moved or whatever. So it's just basically putting some steps in place to kind of really constrain those pages and try and make it as client-proof as possible while still giving them access to update and edit their site, of course. So that's next month. But tonight we're going to be talking about container layouts in Elementor. Not how to use them, but how to use them well. This session is about building layouts that stay clean, responsive, editable, without turning into a nesting mess 6 months later. If you've ever opened one of your own layouts and thought, why did I build it like this? This is for you. I am as guilty of that as everyone else here. I've went into a client website 6-8 months later and going, what did I do that for? So what we're going to focus on is practical structure, some responsive logic, and some of the small decisions that make layouts hold up over time. A quick note. So you might be up to date with the news. Elementor has released version 4 of the editor as beta. They also said, you can start using it on production environments. Like, really? So this version introduces a new editor, a new concept, which is called class first base system. And it introduces something called atomic widgets and a lot of structural changes in the background. Now, it's backward compatible, as in Elementor sites using the current v3 won't break. It'll still be supported. This is just a new method that they are rolling out. But as I say, it's still in beta. I wouldn't use it in a production environment. I'd certainly build it, maybe put it on some of my own websites or some of my staging sites. But yeah, personally, I don't recommend deploying beta architecture changes to live client systems, not yet. But it is coming. But this session focuses on current container workflows like Flexbox containers as they exist today. The principles that we're going to cover tonight will still apply. So structural clarity, reducing, nesting, intentional responsive logic, that sort of stuff. When version 4 matures and stabilizes, I think absolutely deserves its own deep dive session. So I will be covering it at some point, but not quite yet. So tonight is about discipline and structure, not chasing the newest interface. So with that out of the way, let's talk about why layouts that look fine still cause some problems. Now, a layout can look correct and still be structurally weak. So you can see on the screen, it looks fine. You go back into the page builder and it's just an absolute mess inside. So most Elementor layouts work visually. It's a drag and drop site builder. That's the way that we build these things. The problem usually shows up later on though. A content edit breaks alignment. Tables look slightly off. The tablet and mobile looks slightly off. Maybe another developer opens it and hesitates and questions why has the previous person done it that way. Visual success isn't necessarily structural success. So when they're doing the overengineering, it doesn't tend to look dramatic. It kind of hides inside in plain sight. Some of the clues, extra containers, overrides inside containers, maybe small reactive fixes for mobile and tablet. Again, guilty. I've done those things. You're kind of under pressure. The client's chomping at the bit, and the CEO's iPad view just isn't working. So you just put in a quick fix. Okay, does it work? Yeah, great. And these things build up over time to be messy layout. So the goal of this session really is to kind of build layouts that survive change, reduce the fragility of the layout, and reduce some decision fatigue as well. So you're actually thinking about the structure and what happens, and a well thought out layout can survive for ages. So the key takeaway here is if you have to explain the layout to someone else, or even yourself 6 months later, it's probably already too complicated. So let's have a think about why this happens. I couldn't find a good picture for user roles, so I just put normal roles, if you're wondering why that picture's there. So containers, they should have a clear job to do. So when layouts get messy, it's usually because the containers don't have a well-defined role. They're just there. So containers are not visual wrappers. They are layout logic. Now, because Elementor is a drag and drop, it's a very visual builder, it is really easy to think of containers as visual wrappers, to put stuff in, to change things, right, to modify the way that it's out, but they're not really, they're layout logic. So there's a simple 3-layer model that you can apply to containers. The first one is structural containers. So these define the overall page flow. They control the max width and the section spacing, and they rarely change across breakpoints. So these are your, okay, it's a column going down the way, or it's a row, a row of columns going left to right, or for example, it's a full screen section, a full screen container with boxed width content, that sort of thing. This is the core structural containers. The next one is layout containers. So these define the direction. So the rows and the columns. They handle the distribution, so that they justify the align models. And these are the containers that manage the responsive behavior. So if you think about the structural containers like the main box everything fits into, so overall page flow, control the max width of the, control the spacings between. Then inside that, you have each section within that is your layout containers. And this is controlling which way the content goes, left to right, up or down. It's justifying it, left, right, or aligning it to the middle. And that's the place where you want to manage the responsive behavior. So what does it do on mobile when it slides down? Or from mobile up to desktop, how does it expand out? And then there are content containers. So these are grouped elements. That's where your actual content goes in. That's where your image goes in. That's where your paragraph, your headings go inside these containers. And it's all about managing just the content within these. So this kind of third layer is rarely responsible for any structural alignment. It's just the content themselves. So the key for this kind of 3-layer model is to have one responsibility per container. So it's either structural, it's either layout, or it's either content, and then you repeat that structure throughout the page. If one container is doing spacing, alignment, and breakout overrides, that's usually too much, and that's where things kind of break down, because you're trying to do too much within this one particular area. And when roles for the containers are, I keep saying sections, when roles for these containers are clear, then nesting naturally reduces, because you don't have to put anything else to kind of rein that in. But when roles are unclear, the kind of nesting just explodes, because you're adding more containers, you're adding more complexity, and that's where things go wrong. So most problems aren't technical, really. They're usually structural. So let's talk about what happens when we don't define the roles properly, what can happen and what usually happens. I call this container soup. It's really over-engineering. It's usually reactive. I touched on that. It's usually not intentional. It's the going in to make a quick fix, and then next week going in to make another quick fix. It's during the testing phase. You're on Zoom. You're on the system. The client spots something. You react there and then. You change something. So all these small changes that build up. Nobody really sets out to build a messy layout. It just happens one small fix at a time. So here's the typical progression: is you build a simple 2-column layout. Something doesn't align quite right, so you add a container to fix that alignment. And then the tablet spacing feels a bit off, so you override that padding. And then the mobile stacks a bit weirdly, so you go all in and you just duplicate the entire container, and you just hide one from desktop and you put one in from mobile. And bang, now you have 6, 8, 10 containers. You got breakpoint overrides layered on top of each other. You've got alignment controlled in 3 different places, and who knows what's happening when you're switching between tablet and mobile. So over-engineering usually comes from solving these kind of little micro problems in isolation, one at a time, instead of really stepping back and adjusting the overall structure. So sometimes it's important to get into that mindset of being like an engineer and having that control, that constraint to step back from what you're doing, zoom up to your 10,000 foot level and have a look and see what's happening overall. It's very easy just to jump in and fix something in Elementor, but it takes real constraint to step back and think, how is this overall working? What's causing this problem? And that's really a lack of skill. We're all skilled. We all know how to use page builders. It's really a lack of understanding. We know Elementor inside out. We know how content fits on a web page. It's just usually things like time and pressure. It's trying to avoid breaking what already works. I know personally, I've done landing pages that scroll forever. There's like so many different sections in it, and when you just get something right, and then you want to add something else, or it doesn't quite works. A section doesn't quite work on mobile. It's very tempting just to copy that over and play around with it and hide other stuff. So having that skill just to step back and go, hang on, what's really going on with this content? Is it structural? Is it layout problem? Is it content problem? So the problem isn't nesting itself, really. It's kind of nesting without intent, without a planned structure put in place. So what are the legitimate reasons to nest? Because we should have nested content. Nested content is good. That's the way websites work. So when do we need nested content, and when is it just over-engineering? So when nesting is actually correct, nesting is a tool. It's not a mistake. Nesting isn't bad in itself. Deep nesting as well isn't automatically wrong. So that's not what I'm coming from. The issue is whether it's intentional or not. Did you mean to put that structure that way? Or did it evolve out of micro changes? So I've got a few legitimate reasons to nest content. The first one is changing layout direction. So the parent is a row, the child needs to stack internally. That's a valid structural shift. That's when you're moving from desktop to tablet to mobile. That's nesting. That's completely valid. That's what we want to do. Isolating responsive behavior. There's a specific section here that needs different stacking logic, depending on which frame it's in, tablet, mobile. And you don't want to affect other siblings. So this is a behavioral thing on a particular device. So that could be some of your content, reducing size, moving its layout a little bit more intentionally because you got less room on the device. So these are responsive behaviors, and nesting that data within there, that's valid. That's what we want to do. A third nesting, a correct way of nesting is grouping related content. So what I'm thinking about here is things like card components, media with text blocks next to them, call to action clusters as well. That's usually when you got a group of content that all kind of works together visually. That's where nesting is really good, and that is correct behavior. And the last one is controlling distribution independently. So the outer container controls width, the inner container controls the alignment, and for example, a full width container with maybe boxed content or full width content. So having that ability to control the way that the content is displayed, and within that, that's correct nesting use for that. And so the structural test really is, does this container have a clear job? Does it have a clear role? Or is it just fluff that we've added in with a micro change? But here's the real test. If I removed it, would the structure collapse or just the styling? If the structure collapses, then it needs to be there. It's intended to be there. If you're removing a container and some of the styling sucks, then that's not a good use of nesting containers. That should be at your content level and alignment level. So if only fixes spacing, it's probably doing the wrong job. Nest to change behavior, not to patch the behavior and layout. So if those are the good reasons to nest, what are the warning signs that we can see? Spotting structural issues before they become problems. Red flags to look out for. So most messy layouts don't look messy. You have to kind of know what to look for. And this goes back to what I was saying. Sometimes visually it looks okay when you're in the editor, but when you're doing the digging, when you've got the navigation layer out, you can really see those containers for those. So visually it might look okay, but once you start to dig deep, then you can start to find some structural mess. So red flag number one is, again, it's the containers with no clear purpose. So a container would be holding a single widget without any layout logic, with no grouping value. It's just kind of sitting there with the content inside it. So, I mean, that's a red flag. It should not be there if it's not doing anything. So you've got to ask yourself, why does that exist? I've actually got 4 red flags, but I couldn't find an image with 4 red flags, so it's just 3. This red flag number 2 is containers used as spacers. Now I know that everyone here knows that that's the wrong thing to do, but it happens. So extra wrappers just to add some padding, maybe on a mobile or a different use case, but yeah, they're just there to bump things out. And that means the spacing is handled inconsistently, because now you've got this container that's doing something inside another container, which it shouldn't be doing. So empty containers for vertical gaps. That's the old, what would you call it? Just say you've got a service page and you've got your 3x2 grid. So you've got your 6 boxes, but your client's only got 5 things to put in there. And you're like, what do I do with that one? I want it all neat. So I'll put an extra container in the middle and kind of pad it out so that it shoves the other 2. And you're like, no, it's just mess. So that's a red flag. Red flag number 3 is alignment controlled in multiple places. We kind of touched on that in number 2. So this is where you've got your parent to justify, you've got your child to align stuff, and then you've got overrides on the widgets in the content container themselves. So you're not sticking to that 3 model layer. You're changing attributes in each of the 3 layers, and that's just causing confusion. You've got things going on all over the place, and that does mean when you remove a container, it affects everything. It's not just affecting the content inside; it's affecting the paddings, the layouts, the alignment, all that sort of stuff. So if you're doing it that way, or you see it that way, that means alignment is happening in all 3 layers, and feature edits just become kind of guesswork. So you don't know what to change, or if you do change something, what will break the system. And red flag number 4 is breakpoint overrides, but breakpoint overrides everywhere. So padding's adjusted at every breakpoint inside each container. Widths is changed at tablet and mobile level. Direction is changed in different containers as well. So that's a sign that the structure wasn't planned at the start. It has kind of evolved. So if you're fighting the layout, it's usually, as I say, structural and not visual. And that's where you have to kind of stand back and see what is going on with this page and make kind of smart decisions as to how to lay it out properly. So how do you design a responsive behavior properly from the very start? Most responsive problems aren't breakpoint problems. There's the structural issue within the way the layouts has been implemented. So it really starts with a mind shift set. Don't ask, how do I fix this for tablet? What you should be asking, this is where we stand back, you should be asking, what should this container do when the space reduces? Or what does this container do when the space expands out if you're doing mobile first and then to desktop? That's a responsive design behavior, but it's a mindset shift. So it's not going in there and changing things at this viewport and that container width. It's asking what does the space need to do when it's growing or shrinking? So it's a different way of looking at things. So here are some core decisions to think about when building your responsive structure. Number 1, I don't have any slides. Number 1 is direction before overrides. So should this row become a column? Should it wrap? Should the order change? So we're thinking about direction, how direction changes solves most issues cleanly. And this is when we're thinking about responsive logic for those. Because you'll find naturally widgets and columns, flexbox, it's all designed to naturally flow when device viewports change. And what we're trying to do is think about how this happens rather than force it to happen when we're tinkering around with tablet and mobile and desktop. So number 2 is let flex do the work. Use the wrap intentionally, how it runs. Use the gap instead of margin hacks as well. Gap's consistent across flex. It works it out for you. But if you start tinkering with margin hacks, then you're throwing all that structure within the container off. And avoid fixed widths where possible. As I say, flex calculates things automatically depending on where the content within that flexbox lives. So let it do its job, let it calculate, let it expand and wrap naturally. The problems arise when you're going into the flex content and you're changing what it does away from the natural behavior. Number 3 is avoid duplication as a shortcut. So this is where people just have the container, they duplicate it, they hide one on mobile, they show one on desktop, and then they go in and they're changing the paddings and the margins and the font sizes and everything inside, just so it looks okay on, for example, a mobile. That's really bad. It creates 2 systems to maintain. It usually increases future editing risk as well, certainly when you hand it over to the client. They're now not sure where to make the changes to make it in both, or, and what happens if you're doing a big content edit, so it really, trying to avoid that method of doing it. And number 4 is override spacing is your last plan of attack. So padding and margin tweaks should be a refinement within that particular responsive thing. It shouldn't be to cause the content to shift in that particular mode. And so it's not a structural repair, it's just a refinement within your tablet, your desktop, or mobile. It's not to force the content to fit into that particular area. So spacing is breaking the layout. Structure is probably wrong initially. Responsive clarity comes from fewer decisions, not more controls. You're letting Flexbox do the work, and you're letting Flexbox do all the calculations. And when the structure is clean, the responsive logic kind of becomes a bit boring. You don't have to think about it. And that's good. Boring is good sometimes. So let's talk about some patterns that actually hold up in some real builds. I find the most horrible background ever for a slide. This one makes my eyes bleed, but in a kind of groovy, funky way. It's a good layout, survive content edits, client changes over time. The real test of layout isn't how it looks today. It's what happens when the content changes 6 months' time or a year's time. I had to dull that background because it was so horrible. So I've got 3 patterns for you. Yes, 3 patterns. So pattern number 1 is called the stable hero. So this is your hero page, it's your home page, it's your top of your call to action or landing page. So the structure is you've got the outer structure controls the width. So you've got maybe got full width with box content or full width, full content. But your main outer structure, that's controlling the width for that. You've got your inner layout container, and that's handling the alignment. Should it be a row or column? And then you've got all the content grouped logically within that. So the key points for this one is avoid fixed heights unless absolutely necessary. Let the containers handle the gaps and the paddings and fitting the content inside. Let padding create space, not empty containers. Don't put any extra containers in there just for spacing and margins. And design so that headline length can change safely. And this is the real strength of Flexbox because it does calculate all the spacing and paddings for you. So if you let it do its job properly and you align it properly and let it use its calculations, you'll find that the containers will fit to additional content lengths without you having to change margins and paddings and stuff. Pattern number 2 is called the flexible image and content block. So in this structure, you've got one layout container, again, as similar to the top one. But then you've got directional changes at the mobile. So you've got your inner content and that inner container, and that one is causing the directions to change at mobile. So it would be a stacking format. So on desktop, you've got the image. One side, you've maybe got text, like a headline 1, headline 2, maybe a button or something, like a call to action type layout. So you've got direction where you want to change that at mobile, you want that to stack. And again, you don't want any duplication. You don't want to have, one for desktop, one for tablet, and one for mobile. You want to let the Flexbox do its job again. So key points, use flex direction instead of a separate mobile layout. Know which direction the content is going to move when you're changing the screen sizes. Again, avoid hard-coded widths. Let Flexbox work on those gaps and columns and paddings. And keep the image and content logically grouped together. So you've got your outer layer, which is define the width. You've got your structural layer, which define your layouts. And then you've got your content container, which is grouping the content together logically. And this really works. It's predictable stacking. You know that when you go down to mobile, that the image will be at the top and the text will be underneath. Or, if the image isn't as important, the call to action, you maybe want the text with button first and then image at the bottom. That's what Flexbox is for, change directions on different devices, which is great. It's easy to edit later because there's only the one option there. You're not creating duplicates, and there's no breakpoint patchwork. You're not going in there and changing. You're not going into the mobile view and changing your paddings. It's all just Flexbox working as it's intended to be. Last one is the clean card grid. So this structure is your parent container uses the wrap, and you want to use consistent gap control. The cards themselves are self-contained content containers. So you could take, for example, the flexible image and content block up there, and you can throw it in this kind of layout. And that's what we're talking about. So that consistent content containers is then multiplied and wrapped. And again, we're not having extra containers between grids and cars, we're letting Flexbox do its job. Or grid, if you're using CSS grid, same similar thing. You're avoiding adding margins based on whatever system you want to. You're letting the gap control the content flow. And you're letting Flex wrap handle how it flows together. So does it flow down the way, or does it flow backwards? Is it up and down? So you're really kind of leaning into the Flex controls and not having to hack all the spacing and stuff for those. This works really well. It also handles 3, 4, or 7 cards without breaking the system, because you're letting Flexbox naturally wrap the stuff together. So it works like that straight away. It's easy to add or remove cards, that just duplicate them for those and change the content. And again, we're looking at minimal breakpoint overrides here. We've just got the one container with the one structure, and we're letting Flex do its job. So all these patterns, they share clear container roles, minimal nesting, only the nesting that's needed, behavior first, response logic, and then no reactive duplication. So you're not duplicating all those things just to make it do a different job on mobile or tablet. So good layout patterns feel almost a bit boring to build, and that's usually a good sign. Boring usually means predictable, and that's good for us as developers and designers. And this is really what modern-based Elementor builds should look and feel like. No stress. Use the tools, use the controls, let it flow properly, and don't try and hack the system. So let's distill all this into something that you can apply immediately. I have a simple checklist, but I don't have it on screen, apparently. No. Okay, so I'll put this out on, I'll put the slide out on the meetup page. You'll be able to see all the notes and stuff that are in here. But a mental checklist to apply to every layout. If you get everything else tonight, remember this one. It's not a rule book, it's just a filter, really. So checklist point 1, every container should have a job. So structure, layout behavior, and content grouping in that order. If it doesn't have a clear role, it probably shouldn't exist. And this is not just rules or recommendations for you. It's also when you're looking at client sites and trying to educate the client as to how to create new pages for the future. Give them this set of checklists as well. So if it doesn't have a clear role, probably shouldn't exist or needs to be restructured. Checkpoint number 2 is, am I nesting to change behavior or patch the behavior? So changing direction is valid when we're doing different modes. That's okay. Isolating logic is valid. So changing the flow control up or down, left or right is good. But fixing spacing with wrappers is usually not. So we want to avoid that. Checklist point number 3, does responsive behavior feel predictable? Does it stack logically? Did I change the direction first before overriding spacing? Always go with the Flexbox controls rather than jump onto your padding and margins. Are there any unnecessary breakpoint overrides? So are you forcing stuff to do something when you're moving between desktop, tablet, and mobile at the container level? If you're doing that, probably not the best way. You should really be going into the structure of Flexbox and the containers inside. So if the responsive logic feels a bit fragile, structure, again, is usually the main issue for that. And lastly, checkpoint number 4, could somebody else safely edit this? This is kind of the professional test. Can a client add content within that container system without it breaking? Can another developer understand it, open it up and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. And would you feel calm opening it in 6 months' time, or would you be kind of freaking out having to re-edit the monster that you knew you created? So clean layouts aren't about fewer containers. They're about making fewer decisions or making fewer better decisions. If your layouts are clear with intent, responsive logic becomes really simple, and simplicity scales really, really well. All right. Let's wrap this up and then I'll open up Q&A. So one last thought here is encouraging a self-audit. So before we jump into the Q&A, here's something to think about. When you build layouts in Elementor, are you designing your structure up front, or are you reacting to structural issues as they appear? Do you really sit down and think, how is the content going to move around between desktop, mobile, tablet, extra large as well, for that? Or are you just reacting to what the content is doing in there? I say most overengineering doesn't come from a lack of skill. We've all got the good skills. It comes from just solving all those kind of micro problems, one at a time. It's an evolving disaster rather than a logically thought out, boring structure. So ask yourself, do I know why each of these containers exist? Or did it appear during a late night alignment battle one time with your coffee or a glass of beer or wine? When something breaks at the tablet, do I fix the structure or did I modify the content padding? Or do I add another override within that container? So the difference between these types of builds means that one's stable, one's boring, one's predictable, and the other one is fragile, usually invisible at the client side, but certainly messy when you look at the structure inside something like Elementor. So you don't need fewer features. All you need is a clear intent, clean architecture and decision. Is good. If you can follow those three principles for those containers, then you should find that when you're naturally building responsive layouts, things will work better without having to go and hack things and just create a monster that you know you're going to have to edit at some point later on. Okay, so let's wrap that up. What layout problems do you normally have? What did you think about the clarity that we talked about? Any other Elementor issues, just lay them on me. So if you want to just put down something in the chat, that's fine. Or if you want to unmic, then just go for it. I'll stop the slide shares. There we go.
Well, I just wanted to say, well, thanks for that. That was great. I actually found that quite interesting. I've been doing responsive design from the days when you built your own themes and had to code your own media queries before there were even frameworks. So I've been doing it a while. I won't claim it necessarily well, but yeah. Um, Going back a few Elementor versions before Flex, there was a bit of criticism about Elementor, just about how many containers it had, how many divs it used to have, and it was perceived as a performance issue. And now that you're discussing this, I think I've gone too far the other way with Flex and being too stingy with my containers, and I probably need to, in places where it's appropriate, use more containers than what I'm actually doing.
Yeah, definitely before version 3 with Flex. And there was an article that came out to say that something to do with Elementor was slowing pages down. I think it was a Google report or something along that lines. And yeah, I mean, the Elementor team, I was going to say freaked out. They didn't freak out, but they addressed the situation. And that's when the new version of the Edge, they had a whole performance team. That's when you start to see Flex come in and they dropped all these divs that are needed when you had the sections to control where things. And that was doing exactly what I was talking about tonight. It was mixing the structural with the padding and putting, divs in place just to provide padding and movement and stuff, which is the wrong way to do it. So yeah, it was a bit of a mess. Yeah. Don't be afraid of using containers if they're needed. Just know how they're used. That's the key, really. Caroline is saying definitely the worst is when you get a site when someone has done the auto upgrade from sections to containers. I really try and minimize them. Yep. Yep. Look, it's great having something that migrates automatically for you. It does, 90% of the job. But yeah, you don't just leave it as is. Go in and tidy it up afterwards as well. Yeah, so it's a good lesson. I mean, we all inherit designs from other developers and designers. I think the key question is, and I mentioned it in one of the slides, if you're looking at it and going, why did they do it that way? Then that's probably a structural layout issue. You should be opening up Elementor and going, yep, okay, that section's there. I keep saying section. That container's there. That container's there. It does its job. Great. That's what we really want to see. It's just less problems in the future. I think that's it for questions in the chat. Yeah. Raquel says, I was scared of containers at first, but now I find them very useful, especially directions and not mobile reverse calls. I don't think you're alone, Raquel. I think the whole Flexbox and CSS grid thing, when it just appeared overnight, it didn't really evolve over many years, but from an Elementor point of view, it just appeared overnight. And with all the different options, it seems overwhelming. You can actually really mess up Flexbox if you get right into it and you're clicking on all the different options in there. Sometimes if you get to that point, it's good just to reset it and then just think about what it's doing within that particular space. I usually start with wrapping, having to think about how the content flows on that page, because I always do mobile first. So we've always got the mobile view and then say, okay, well, how does that content expand into tablet? How does that content expand into desktop for those? So I kind of think reverse for that. But even things like call to actions, I mentioned that Flex is so powerful in that, you know yourself, if you've designed a call to action that's got an image on the left-hand side and you've got your header, subheader, and button on the right-hand side, which is usually the way it is, there are some cases, and I've done it in a few client builds, where when it goes onto mobile, they actually want that image underneath, because the text, the call to action, and the text, the button is more important than the nice image. So being able to control the direction when you're moving between different modes, it's just fantastic. I couldn't do with it. I couldn't go back to sections. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Now that we've got Flexbox and CSS Grid, I would die if I went back to sections. So yeah, very complicated at first, but once you get just even the general basics, concepts, really, really good. Oh yeah, Paul, you're doing desktop first. It's not a bad approach. I think a lot of people will do desktop first. But yeah, I always do mobile first. I think because from my point of view, when I sit down with the client and then say, okay, right, you've got this much real estate. What's important? What goes on there? Yeah. And then you can expand out to desktop with additional things. But what's the really important minimal stuff that we need to be putting on that screen? That's the way that I approach it. Anyway, it really gets the client to think about using that space wisely and what needs to be there, rather than just trying to take the desktop version of blah, 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 and reducing it and squeezing it down from there. That's great. Thanks for those questions. That's been really useful. I can't see anything else coming through, and we're just up for an hour time. So I think I'm going to end it there. Thanks very much for everyone who's come along. Thanks for your questions. And we'll see you next month. What did I say I was talking about next month is building client-proof pages in Elementor. Yeah. So great. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a fantastic evening or morning, wherever you are. And if you need to get in contact with me, please do through Meetup or Slack or somewhere else. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But have a great evening. Catch you later. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.